Good morning, members of the media. Welcome to another weekly press conference of the People's National Congress Reform. I'm Denroy Tudor, and here with me is MP Mervyn Williams, who will be reading today's prepared statement. MP?
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the media. Hinterland Advancement, offering people a better life on the way to a good life. People's National Congress Reform has always focused on the development of the hinterland. Since the 1960s, when the PNC government developed the Hinterland Development Policy and implemented many measures to develop our hinterland, in the immediate post-independence period, the PNC as a government of the day began realizing the expectations of Guyana's indigenous peoples with respect to their land rights. In this regard, titles to indigenous peoples' lands were issued to 70 indigenous communities and 4 indigenous districts. These districts had as much as 15 settlements or satellite villages. When the coalition government came into office in May 2015, President Granger committed the APNU plus AFC to reducing the gap between the hinterland and the coast and adumbrated the Hinterland 10-point action plan, which is aimed at ensuring the planned development of the hinterland and their concomitant communities. The APNU plus AFC government has approved titles to 8 communities, including Parabara in the Deep South Rupununi, and as you would be aware, Parabara's title will cover an area of close to 1 million acres of land. The People's National Congress Reform wishes to applaud President David Granger and the APNU plus AFC for developing a new good governance system for development in the hinterland, which is characterized by the people of those communities making their own decisions, ushering an era of self-determination, the decentralization of services, and the political, economic, and social empowerment of our indigenous peoples. President Granger and the APNU plus AFC government declared intention is to empower our people generally and our indigenous peoples particularly. The foregoing is commendable since it brought an end to the PPP's failed approach to hinterland development, a policy that dictated what the indigenous peoples could and could not do. The policy of handouts as a means of control and the scant regard that was shown to our indigenous peoples, in which one former president had suggested that if another former president were present, he would have slapped a young man from the hinterland for expressing his views. Those days are over. The people of our hinterland are cognizant of the developments that are taking place in their communities under this coalition government and have vivid memories of the PPP's scant regard for them and will therefore re-elect President David Granger and the APNU plus AFC government. The APNU-AFC government continues to serve all Guyanese. The President Granger-led coalition government correctly brought an end to the PPP's practice of treating our indigenous peoples as only useful as elections time. Our hinterland and its people are on the course to genuine development and they intend to stay there. The People's National Congress Reform is proud that our partners in the APNU-AFC correctly diagnosed the problems facing youth in our hinterland and quickly established the Hinterland Employment and Youth Services, HAYS, which has trained over 4,000 young people. 2,500 of those youths were able to set up their own businesses and are on the way to becoming entrepreneurs and ending their dependency on state handouts. It is important to note as well that 2,232 stimulus grants were distributed. As a consequence, self-employment is on the rise in our hinterland communities. Many jobs have been created for the youths in our hinterland communities. The People's National Congress Reform calls attention to what is happening in every hinterland region. The hinterland is experiencing a revolution in public infrastructure development. These infrastructural developments are having a positive effect on residents and contributing to the improvement of the quality of their lives. The developments include paving and rehabilitation of roads, It is apposite to note that 350 kilometers of roads have been rehabilitated. In addition, many bridges that are critical to the development of the hinterland have been constructed. This is a far cry from the days when the PPP dictators treated the hinterland and its people with contempt and used whatever little development occurred in the hinterland as a basis for accumulation of wealth by the corrupt and dishonest PPP friends and family regime. The People's National Congress Reform wishes to remind all our people that when the APNU-AFC came to power, access to potable water was a serious problem in the hinterland. The coalition government has addressed this problem and has made potable water accessible to hinterland Guyanese. In addition, measures have been taken to ensure that when there's a drought, our people can access potable water. The rehabilitation and construction of roads and bridges have resulted in the opening of farmlands and created access to markets. As a consequence, agricultural development is on the rise in the hinterland communities. The foregoing, together with the establishment of internet access in hinterland communities, has served as a catalyst to the development of businesses in the hinterland communities. It is useful to note that the women of the Rupununi were able to develop the Rupununi Essence brand and to produce and market personal care products from organic forest produce. President Granger and the APNU-AFC have been teaching the hinterland how to fish, rather than the PPP dictatorial approach of giving a fish so that they can dominate and control indigenous peoples for electoral gain. The PNCR is proud of the hundreds of our indigenous brothers and sisters who are now fishing and are on the road to self-reliance. These business enterprises are also benefiting from government's program of bringing electricity to the hinterland through the use of solar power, hydropower, and the use of fossil fuel. The intention of the APNU-AFC government, after winning the elections in 2020, is to intensify our activities in the energy sector to ensure that the hinterland has clean, reliable, and affordable electricity. The developments stated above are occurring while government continues to improve the delivery of education and health services in hinterland communities. This is coupled with the establishment of community radio stations in the hinterland. This effectively ends the PPP policy of keeping hinterland communities in the dark and feeding them with PPP propaganda. The hinterland now boasts a core of young journalists that continues to develop and to be able to provide news and other programs on developments in their community, our country, and the wider world. The People's National Congress Reform is convinced that it is significant developments that are occurring in our hinterland will no doubt result in support for President Granger and the APNU-AFC government. The People's National Congress Reform is convinced that the APNU plus AFC Hinterland Development Program is succeeding and offering our people a better life on the way to the good life, and that all peoples of those communities will re-elect President David Granger and the APNU plus AFC coalition government.
Samuel Sukan, Star 24/7. Approval was given for the residential grant earlier this year. Why now distributed? And with a couple months left before the end of the year, do you think that it will put pressure on village leaders to implement these grants?
The presidential grants?
Yeah.
Why now? Now is an opportune time, and it's not a case where government deliberately stayed its hand in handing over those grants. Many villages have already received their grants, and the grants that were handed out yesterday or the day before are grants that were not handed over earlier in the year, and it's but a small component of the total package. Some of the villages are extremely remote, and if you go into those villages and you hand over those checks to them, they will still have to travel to the city to negotiate those checks at the banks. So we have capitalized on the presence of the leaders in the city to hand over the checks so that they can use the banking system at no expense to the village, so that when they get back home, they have 100% of the grant available for the developmental project that they had in mind. And no, it will not place any burden on the villages. In fact, some villages have been saving their grants from one year to the next to do projects that cannot be totally funded by one grant. For example, Woweta in the North Rupununi, they've embarked on an ecotourism venture, and they have saved 3 years grants to make possible the successful outcome of the ecotourism venture, which includes construction of a road, several benabs and kitchens and so on.
Maybe continue this one. You mentioned the government has approved 8 titles for communities. Can you say how many you have outstanding that are to be issued?
The Umbrella Land Titling Project has identified a number of villages for first-time and extension titles. These 8 are the first of that number. I'm not sure what the outstanding number is, but these 8 are the first of those outstanding villages to be approved. There are a number of factors that are inhibiting the forward movement of the process, which includes court cases in the Mazruni region, withholding of consent to titling in some villages, and legal impediments to title in others, where there are concessions, privately owned lands. By concessions, I mean mining concessions and timber concessions. There are some difficulties also with respect to multiple villages laying claim to extension over the same parcel of land. Those have been worked upon over the last few years, and this output represents the reconciliation of the differences which existed, and so that these will go through. The others we are working on to ensure that impediments are removed, consent is obtained, and we're also hoping that the matters before the courts will come to the logical conclusion, allowing for forward movement in those matters as well.
With that being said, seeing that there aren't any other questions, we wish to thank each and every one of you for coming out this morning, and we'll see you back at our next press conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much.